I'm Rumbi. Welcome back to There's a Book for That, a podcast in which I, a bookworm, talk about different books I have read and apply lessons or themes from those books to social issues. After last week's difficult episode, I thought we might talk about something more neutral, with a 2-for-1 special. Although I will always talk about more than a single book for information, facts, only one will generally form the basis of the show. This week we're talking about A Fairy Tale by Hans Christian Andersen, The Emperor's New Clothes, and The Smartest Guys in the Room by Bethany McLean and Peter Elkind. You may be wondering what those two have in common, and the simple answer is conformity and crime. Using this fairy tale and the book on Enron, a once illustrious energy company, I will discuss the role of conformity in ruining reputations, businesses, and lives. The story of Enron has captured popular imagination since its downfall in 2001 with numerous pop culture references and a not terrible movie on YouTube. I first developed an interest in white-collar crime while working as a young researcher at Chambers & Partners, an organization that ranks the best lawyers and law firms in the world. I had to speak to lawyers and find out what they were working on, talk to their clients, and then rank them according to their practice area, the lawyers, not the clients. One of my practice areas for the USA Guide was white-collar crime in New Jersey, and I ended up talking to a lawyer who was representing Solomon Dweck, then accused of bank fraud in New Jersey. Honestly, I had no idea about the subject, but after researching the topic for a month, I was hooked and decided to continue my research. I basically just followed the white rabbit into a big hole, watching random YouTube videos about Charles Ponzi, Bernie Madoff, and other white-collar criminals, reading articles. There's a guy who crashed a huge bank in Singapore, at which the then Queen of England banked her huge colonial riches. Nobody was safe from white-collar criminals. I discovered the podcast American Greed and watched The Big Short, and then more recently encountered Billy and his ill-fated festival, The Tinder Swindler, and of course the collapses of SVB, Credit Suisse, and FTX, which have given us all pause for thought, even if the banks didn't necessarily collapse due to crimes, but, as I put it, fallouts from a lax regulatory system. I developed a real interest in finance and economics because one thing that I wanted to understand was the mechanism of the crime and whether the businesses could actually have worked. I'm still convinced I could have made Firefest work. I also found the name white-collar crime fascinating, with its hints at refined crime and not those blue-collar manual laborers who commit regular violent crimes. Instead, with white-collar crime, we're confronted with the best of society somehow turning out to be wicked and duplicitous, and everyone is surprised that people who spend money like fish drink water don't actually have all that wealth. We are primed by social conditioning to trust these well-turned-out people in expensive cars, wearing expensive clothes, and they take advantage of it every time. More fool us. So as I began to look more deeply into it, I began to see a trend. There are lots of trends. Most white-collar criminals are heavily dependent on strong networks and communities, especially in the early days, when the scheme and its potential benefits are spread solely by word of mouth. This is especially true in the case of sole traders like Charles Ponzi or Billy McFarland, who start something of their own, as opposed to what we're going to be talking about today, which is a huge company full of criminals. But even then, they're still relying on their network to be able to fend for them, vouch for them, recommend smart young talents who can be indoctrinated and be willing to follow them wherever they need. In fact, in a lot of cases of white-collar crime, nothing would be possible without people willing to trust completely and support someone or something, even against evidence that they should not. Even those people whose literal job is to know better and ask tough questions. Who would have thought that building and working in rooms full of sycophants can have negative repercussions? I'm sure you're as shocked as I am. So let's start with a little background. From the introduction to the smartest guys in the room, we learned that, quote, "The tale of Enron is a story of human weakness, of hubris and greed, and the rampant self-delusion of ambition run amok, of a grey grand experiment in the deregulated world of a business model that didn't work, and of smart people who believed that their next gamble would cover their last disaster, and who couldn't admit they were wrong." End quote. So the book was written in 2003, Enron imploded in 2001. So it was a pretty quick turnaround. Fun fact, it was sponsored by Fortune, who were the people who gave Enron a prize for being like the most innovative company 6 years in a row. I think they were trying to make amends. I'm not convinced. The writers interviewed a lot of people and found out what things were like for people who were working there. They looked at all the data, they looked at all the papers, they looked at all the financial statements, etc. And then they put it all together in this really fun book. I would recommend it as a read because it reads well. But also I enjoyed reading the book for the same reasons that I enjoyed watching The Wolf of Wall Street. These are horrible people having a good time. And when you look at what they're doing, you think to yourself, wow, crime really does pay. I think it's really important to have that perspective and realize that without sufficient regulations, most people committing white-collar crimes, i.e. people with good lawyers and accountants, will get away with most things, most of the time. And they have a rollicking good time. There is no remorse. When you see what people were doing in the 80s and 90s, you understand why nobody has money now. Because a lot of people did fun, dumb things with other people's money when crime was paying. One thing about white-collar criminals is they know how to party, which they do because they're spending someone else's money. Honestly, for the top 10% of executives and even the associates and stuff at Enron, life was amazing. But let's rewind. How did we get here? So I tried to think of an explanation for me before I started doing the reading about finance. And I came up with this terrible, but I'm hoping I'm hoping it's accurate. I'm hoping it makes sense. Let me give it a go. I'm sure someone will let me know if I'm wrong. The short and simple explanation for what went wrong at Enron is, imagine you have an idea to build a big, beautiful hotel out of Lego. You are Ken Lay, CEO of Enron. You have this idea for this hotel, but you don't have enough money to make it as big and beautiful as you would like. So you go to the stock market. In this instant, you go outside, you talk to your friends and neighbors, whatever you have in your little village where you decided to build this hotel, people you know, and you say to them, let's all go to the Lego store together so we can buy bricks. And we'll all be shareholders. That is, we'll own bricks in the hotel. And every time that someone comes to stay at the hotel, we'll split the money according to how many bricks you have. Perfect. If you're building things right. The difference is what Enron did was take everyone's money, say they would go to the Lego store, buy the good bricks made out of gold, and bought the shitty bricks made out of wood. Then built the hotel by the sea. So then they did a lot of weird accounting tricks, like in this case, painting the bricks, the wooden bricks or the wood gold, and then pretending like it was gold and paying themselves the difference from that money, right? Because there's a lot of money floating if you're not actually spending it on what you said you would. So by the end, the wood had rotten through, but from the bottom. Nobody could see because the hotel still looked beautiful and shiny. But inside, it was rotten through and the building collapsed, devaluing the Lego bricks, which everyone thought were gold, leaving them with virtually nothing. That's the short version. You can fast forward about 5 minutes while I do the long version and talk about special purpose vehicles and whatnot. So in the long version, remember that I'm new to being a finance geek, so I don't have everything down pat, but this is what, I understand from the book and, my sources, which are at the bottom of the transcript. Enron was an energy company formed in 1986 following a merger between Houston Natural Gas Company and the Omaha-based Internorth Incorporated. After the merger, Kenneth Lay, who had been the chief executive officer, the CEO of Houston Natural Gas, became CEO of Enron and the chairman. He quickly rebranded, through a really weird process of picking the name, Enron into an energy trader and supplier. In 1990, he created the Enron Finance Corporation and appointed Jeff Skilling to head the new corporation. Jeff Skilling was coming from McKinsey, which, as we know, is the big management consultancy type place where they have processes and everybody's very posh and blah, blah, blah. Very well rated. And so these are kind of people that Ken Lay wanted in the organization, but also became part of the problem later on. By 1992, the company had become the largest natural gas provider in North America, which is why their collapse a mere decade later, was a really huge deal. The Journal of Accountancy, a group of people who were shamed by the sycophantic antics of the auditors, Arthur Andersen, who basically lost all credibility and independence and started acting as though they too worked at Enron and helped to obfuscate matters, hide criminal activity from investors and analysts and etc., noted, quote, coincidentally, but not inconsequentially, the US economy during the 1990s was experiencing the longest bull market in its history. Pause. So, bull market, imagine a bull seeing red. It's charging. It's going for it. In a bull market, everybody's buying. Everybody wants more. Everybody wants it. The opposite of this is a bear market, which is when you're hibernating and you're sitting on your money and you don't want anybody to have it because things aren't looking good and you need to feel safe. Those are the two differences, right? So in this time, to continue the quote, well, no, I'm not going to continue the quote yet. But in this time, they were experiencing the longest time of everybody charging and spending money and having a good time, right? Continue the quote. Enron's corporate leadership, Lay, the CEO and chair, excluded, comprised mostly young people, like Jeff Skilling, who had never experienced an extended bear market, the extended period of hibernation, of keeping your money close, of people wanting to save, of people being stingy, basically. New investment opportunities were opening up everywhere, including markets in energy futures. Wall Street demanded double-digit growth from practically every venture, and Enron was determined to deliver, end quote. So they had a lot of pressure on them because they want to be considered to be a really big deal on Wall Street. So they need to show that they're coming up with these numbers. And how they did that, to quote Super Hans, the secret ingredient is crime. So, he had an army of young optimists who thought that empires were forever and were making shady decisions to make the future pay for the present. And eventually, it all fell down. They had a lot of motivation to do bad deals. And like I said, everyone was having a good time. Again, from the Journal of Accountancy, quote, Enron pampered its associates with a long list of corporate perks, including concierge services and a company gym. Skilling rewarded production with merit-based bonuses that had no cap. That means that they go on indefinitely, permitting traders to eat what they killed, end quote. So you basically have this environment where they're like, if you do well, we're going to reward you. People start doing a lot of financial wizardry. Basically, to return to our analogy, to hide the fact that the wood, while glittery, was not gold, they got gold paint and started making it look good. And they started getting lights and stuff so that it would be shiny all the time when you looked at it, right? This included things like mark-to-market accounting. I'm not an accountant, but from what I understand, it's like basically borrowing profit from your future without really thinking about what's going to happen when you need that profit in the future. And special purpose entities or special purpose vehicles, which are used to hide bad debt so that people don't know that the hotel is made out of wood and basically losing money. If we follow our hotel analogy, once you realize that your Lego bricks are rotting and not stable, you buy a restaurant so that you can say to people that you offer an all-inclusive experience and distract people from the creaks and leaks. But you say that the restaurant belongs to somebody else. It's like a franchise that we just took into the hotel, so that no one knows that you bought it, because people are asking, where are you getting the money to get a restaurant? You owe me money. People don't like when you're spending their money and you owe them money, right? Good. So then, if the restaurant makes money, you keep it as profit. And if it loses money, you stand around like the hot dog man, and I think you should leave asking, we're looking for the guy who did this. Right? Normally, this shouldn't work as well as it did because someone should be watching and making sure that it doesn't. Look, we'd all love to be able to hide our credit card debts and student loans in the Cayman Islands when going for mortgages. But that's the lifestyle of the rich and famous. It's not for us povos. In the case of Enron, their auditors were complicit. So it worked. Quote, by leveraging special purpose vehicles, special purpose entities, mark-to-market accounting, and financial reporting loopholes, Enron became one of the most successful companies in the world. The globe. End quote. This Class A wizardry is what allowed Enron to be able to report market anomalies when it came to their stock prices. What do I mean by that? Basically, they were just showing too much money, right? From Investopedia, quote, Enron's stock price, quote, Enron's stock price mostly followed the S&P 500 for most of the 90s. However, expectations for the company began to soar. In 1999, 2 years before the bust, the company's stock increased 56%. In 2000, it increased an additional 87%, yeah? Both returns widely beat broad market returns, and the company was soon trading at a 70 times price-earnings ratio, end quote. Guys, the S&P, like the New York Stock Exchange or the FTSE, are like top of the pops or MTV music charts for stock prices. I'm going to get in so much trouble for these analogies, but, it's for people like us who don't really know what's going on, but we're just trying to know more, right? Good. So they tell you who everyone is buying, who everyone is listening to, who's most valuable, right? Now, imagine if you saw a SoundCloud artist with 15 downloads and 100 listens on MTV as the number one artist. You'd be a bit surprised, right? What Enron basically did was listen to their own music for 1,000 different devices and buy their own music until everyone thought they were great. And then once they were on MTV and everyone started to buy, encouraged by the analysts, top of the pops, etc., and someone was like, wait, that's not right. But by then it's too late because they'd already been spending all this money. They've been on cribs, showing off all their beautiful houses. They've ramped up their cars or whatever that show was. They've done all the things, This top of the pops analogy can also be applied to people like Billy and his Firefest, or the recently convicted Sam Bankman-Fried, who literally just made sure that they were seen with people who were already famous to build their credibility. Another trend that I find in white collar crime is amazing returns, like 70 times price earning ratio, is that if those amazing returns are outside of the norm, 100% of the time, 100% of the time, they are a lie. And anyone who engages will lose their money. Unless you're investing in something completely new, and even then it takes some time to get off the ground, and stock prices usually remain stable. And it was the wizardry that they were doing which allowed Enron to be spending money like they all had trust funds while reporting record profits year on year. I bet they weren't even paying taxes, but I haven't been bothered to look into that yet. So anyway, by the end, execs had started behaving in really shady ways, surreptitiously selling their stocks, calling people names, quitting, unquitting. Finally, it all began to unravel as Wall Street analysts and publications, like Fortune, began to ask tougher questions, realizing that perhaps they'd been had. By October 2001, Enron had reported a third quarter loss. So after 2 years of reporting 56% and 87%, now you're saying that you've lost 618 million. How, right? But this would have been okay because, when you read the Enron book, The Smartest Guys in the Room, you realize how much money they were spending. If I was an accountant at Enron in 1999, I could have saved 618 million easy, just by selling off the private planes. I haven't got to that part yet. However, Enron then announced that it would need to restate its financial statements from 1997 to 2000 to correct accounting violations. This is what made everybody's spidey sense finally start tingling, because what are you talking about? Then, on November 28, 2001, credit rating agencies reduced Enron's credit rating to junk status. Basically, they were like, put it in the bin, don't touch it, effectively solidifying the company's path to bankruptcy. As I said, finance, business, it depends on your network. And once the big names start giving up on you, you're done. By the end of the day, Enron's stock price had dropped to 61 cents. Just 5 months earlier, it had been around $90. In the end, Enron's $63.4 billion bankruptcy was the biggest on record at the time. It got worse. That's more than the annual GDP of countries like Costa Rica, Jordan, Tunisia, and Bahrain. It's a lot of money. So now that we know about Enron and how things worked there and where that led, I'd like to raise my first question for analysis. Some of the things in the book seem so strange, so far-fetched, I didn't even know that it was possible for a company to lend its staff millions. I'm talking 6 million for this, and they were writing off these loans. The company had a fleet, not one, a fleet of private planes to be used by execs and their families. Like your wife has a birthday, you're like, babe, take the plane, meet me in Washington. What? They were expensing strippers and 10K lunches. It was all going down. The execs were jet-setting, shaking hands with all the important people in Washington and further afield, building castles in the sky, or India, through a combination of great salesmanship, PowerPoint presentations, and subterfuge, which is a long way of saying they were lying. So much of what went on was such an open secret that one has to wonder why everyone was so willing to be complicit, right up until the company went under beneath the weight of all those lies. In thinking about an answer to that question, I went back to my childhood and the well-known tale of conformity and corruption by Hans Christian Andersen, The Emperor's New Clothes. I will now read it in full. If you know the story, fast forward about 7 minutes. Many years ago, there was an emperor so exceedingly fond of new clothes that he spent all his money on being well-dressed. He cared nothing about reviewing his soldiers, going to the theater, or going for a ride in his carriage, except to show off his new clothes. He had a coat for every hour of the day, and instead of saying, as one might about any other ruler, the king's in council, here they always said, the emperor's in his dressing room. In the great city where he lived, life was always gay. Every day, many strangers came to town, and among them, one day, 2 swindlers. They let it be known that they were weavers, and they said they could weave the most magnificent fabrics imaginable. Not only were their colors and patterns uncommonly fine, but clothes made of this cloth had a wonderful way of becoming invisible to anyone who was unfit for his office or who was unusually stupid. Those would be just the clothes for me, thought the emperor. If I wore them, I'd be able to discover which men in my empire are unfit for their posts, and I could tell the wise men from the fools. Yes, I certainly must get some of the stuff woven for me right away. He paid the 2 swindlers a large sum of money to start work at once. They set up 2 looms and pretended to weave, though there was nothing on the looms. All the finest silk and the purest old thread which they demanded went into their travelling bags, while they worked the empty looms far into the night. I'd like to know how those weavers are getting on with the cloth, the emperor thought. But he felt slightly uncomfortable when he remembered that those who were unfit for their position would not be able to see the fabric. It couldn't have been that he doubted himself. Yet he thought he'd rather send someone else to see how things were going. The whole town knew about the cloth's peculiar power, and all were impatient to find out how stupid their neighbors were. I'll send my old, honest minister to the weavers, the emperor decided. He'll be the best one to tell me how the material looks, for he's a sensible man and no one does his duty better. So the old minister went to the room where the 2 swindlers sat working away at their empty looms. Heaven help me, he thought, as his eyes flew wide open. I can't see anything at all. But he did not say so. Both the swindlers begged him to be so kind as to come near, to approve the excellent pattern, the beautiful colours. They pointed to the empty looms, and the poor old minister stared as hard as he dared. He couldn't see anything because there was nothing to see. Heaven have mercy, he thought. Can it be that I'm a fool? I'd never have guessed it, and not a soul must know. Am I unfit to be the minister? It would never do to let on that I can't see the cloth. Don't hesitate to tell us what you think of it, said one of the weavers. Oh, it's beautiful, enchanting. The old minister peered through his spectacles. Such a pattern! What colours! I'll be sure to tell the emperor how delighted I am with it. We're pleased to hear that, the swindler said. They proceeded to name all the colours and to explain the intricate pattern. The old minister paid the closest attention so he could tell it all to the emperor. And so he did. The swindlers at once asked for more money, more silk, more gold thread to get on with the weaving. But it all went into their pockets. Not a thread went into the loom, so they worked at their weaving as hard as ever. The emperor presently sent another trustworthy official to see how the work progressed and how soon it would be ready. The same thing happened to him as had happened to the minister. He looked and he looked, but as there was nothing to see in the looms, he couldn't see anything. Isn't it a beautiful piece of goods? The swindlers asked him as they displayed and described their imaginary pattern. I know I'm not stupid, the man thought. So it must be that I'm unworthy of my good office. That's strange. I mustn't let anyone find out, though. So he praised the material he could not see. He declared he was delighted with the beautiful colours and the exquisite pattern. To the emperor, he said, it held me spellbound. All the town was talking of this splendid cloth, and the emperor wanted to see it for himself while it was still in the looms. Attended by a band of chosen men, among whom were two of his old trusted officials, the ones who had been to see the weavers, he sent out to see the two swindlers. He found them weaving with might and man, but without a thread in their looms. Magnificent, said the two officials already duped. Just look, your majesty. What colours? What a design! They pointed to the empty looms, each supposing that the others could see the stuff. What's this? Thought the emperor. I can't see anything. This is terrible. Am I a fool? Am I unfit to be the emperor? What a thing to happen to me of all people. Oh, it's very pretty, he said. It has my highest approval. And he nodded approbation at the empty loom. Nothing could make him say that he couldn't see anything. His whole retinue stared and stared. One saw no more than another, but they all joined the emperor in exclaiming, "Oh, it's very pretty!" And they advised him to wear clothes made of this wonderful cloth, especially for the great procession he was soon to lead. Magnificent! Excellent! Unsurpassed! Were banded from mouth to mouth, and everyone did his best to seem well pleased. The emperor gave each of the swindlers of the swindlers a cross to wear in his buttonhole and the title of Sir Weaver. Before the procession, the swindlers sat up all night and burned more than 6 candles to show how busy they were finishing the emperor's new clothes. They pretended to take the cloth off the loom. They made cuts in the air with huge scissors, and at last they said, "Now the emperor's new clothes are ready for him." Then the emperor himself came, with his noblest noblemen, and the swindlers raised each arm as if they were holding something. They said, "These are the trousers, here's the coat, and this is the mantle," naming each garment. All of them are as light as a spider web. One would almost think he had nothing on, but that's what makes them so fine. Exactly, all the noblemen agreed, though they could see nothing, for there was nothing to see. "If your imperial majesty will condescend to take your clothes off," said the swindlers, "we will help you on with your new ones here in front of the long mirror." The emperor undressed, and the swindlers pretended to put his new clothes on him, one garment after another. They took him around the waist and seemed to be fastening something. That was his train, as the emperor turned around before the looking glass. "How well your majesty's new clothes look!" "Aren't they becoming?" he heard on all sides. "That pattern, so perfect. Those colors, so suitable." "It is a magnificent outfit." Then the Minister of Public Processions announced, "Your Majesty's canopy is waiting outside." "Well, I'm supposed to be ready," the Emperor said, and turned for one last look in the mirror. "It is a remarkable fit, isn't it?" He seemed to regard his costume with the greatest interest. The noblemen who were to carry his train stooped low and reached for the floor, as if they were picking up his mantle. Then they pretended to lift and hold it high. They didn't dare admit they had nothing to hold. So off went the emperor in procession, under his splendid canopy. Everyone in the streets and the windows said, "Oh, how fine are the emperor's new clothes! Don't they fit him to perfection? And see his long train." Nobody would confess that they couldn't see anything, for that would prove him either unfit for his position or a fool. No costume the emperor had worn before was ever such a complete success. "Why, he hasn't got anything on," a little child said. "Did you ever hear such innocent prattle?" said his father. And one person whispered to another what the child had said. "He hasn't got anything on." A child said, "He hasn't got anything on." "But he hasn't got anything on," the whole town cried out at last. The emperor shivered, for he suspected they were right. But he thought, this procession has to go on. So he walked more proudly than ever as his noblemen held high the train that wasn't there at all. End quote. So that was a little long, I apologize, but it does form the basis of my analysis for today. This story has always been particularly interesting to me because it's so dumb, so unlikely. Why would everyone lie to please an old man with too much power? When you put it like that, though, it does become a little easier to understand, I guess. One of the areas I was most interested in at uni, perhaps the most, was social psychology. I wanted to understand how people work when they're part of a group, and honestly, the answer is they get a little scary. Conformity studies in psychology famously explored the role of an authority figure in getting people to do things, and that was scary. They also explored what it was to conform even where there was no authority figure, no threat of punishment if you didn't conform, and again, still terrifying. Ash, in 1951, showed through his experiments the importance of a numerical majority in creating an atmosphere of conformity. In the experiment, groups of 79 students were presented with some lines on a screen and asked which length of the line matched with another. They had to respond orally in the presence of the other participants, who were not actually participants but confederates, i.e. people who were in on it. The participant also had to respond last after everyone else had given their answer. And the study showed that when the confederates formed a wrong majority, the subject conformed and gave the wrong answer about 75% of the time. That's a lot, folks. In 1963, Stanley Milgram conducted a now seminal study on obedience. During it, participants were told they were teachers in a learning experiment, and as part of that would have to deliver electric shocks by pressing a button whenever the student got an answer wrong. They found that the majority of participants obeyed the rules and delivered the electric shocks. No one was actually getting shocked, but they could hear people complaining and crying out as they delivered these pretend shocks, so to them, it was real. When prompted to deliver increasingly dangerous levels of electric shocks to learners, the participants still obeyed, even though they knew the voltage could kill them. Milgram concluded that the experimenters acted as authority figures, because they would wear a white coat and that kind of thing, have a clipboard, thus creating a social pressure for participants to obey, even against their own better judgment. We see similar forces at play in the Enron story. One of the major fallouts from the collapse was the case of Arthur Andersen, the accounting firm which colluded in Enron's funny money hustle by forcing their staff to work hard to keep Enron execs happy, even if it meant looking away from wrongdoing. Staff who shared some of their misgivings were moved off the account as a testament to the prevailing attitudes in which greed was good. We also see the conformity in response to authority in the story of the Emperor's New Clothes, where people refuse to believe and challenge the swindlers based on the evidence of their own eyes because of the fear of authority figures and the consequences of disobeying. They didn't want to lose their jobs. We might consider ourselves immune to such pressures, but time and again we've seen in crime, in politics, and even in interpersonal relationships that group conformity and threats work to motivate people to act against their firmly held beliefs and do things that they might not normally do. In the Ash study, follow-up conversations revealed that some of the people who said that the lines match didn't actually believe this was true. They just didn't want to go against the group. Even though they didn't agree, participants later say they thought they weren't seeing right, just as we saw in the story of the Emperor's New Clothes. Some people even thought that perhaps they had misunderstood the task. So even in a situation where telling the truth had no negative consequences, people still chose to conform in their numbers. These results seemed so bleak that other research teams tried to switch the experiment around to see if they would get similar results. In those follow-up studies, researchers found that while people conformed to the majority up to 75% of the time, when in a room with others, as in the original experiment, this only went down to 33% when they could give their responses alone. That means that even when you're alone, when nobody will know what you said, 33% of us will still lie to meet what the majority wants, to be part of the group. The most significant factor for reducing conformity was the presence of dissenting voices. So, be thankful for people you disagree with, because at least they make you think harder. In a different experiment, the study found that even if they were wrong, the presence of a dissenting voice could reduce conformity down to 5% when the confederate gave the right answer, down from 97% when the majority wrongly agreed. We see it in the story with the emperor. As soon as the kid calls out the bullshit, everyone else feels emboldened to do it. But, if you note, the parent of the child is the first to try and discredit him and keep the lie going, because no one wants to be the one taking a risk to call out bad behavior, especially not at work, when conformity and likability often form the basis for eligibility for promotions and salary raises. In these kind of situations, the pressure to conform can be a lot higher. In The Smartest Guys in the Room, the authors outlined the culture at Enron, and unfortunately, it did not facilitate differences of opinion or dissent. They described the, quote, rank and yank, end quote, approach to performance reviews in which every 6 months, all employees, except Skilling and Lay, underwent individual reviews. During this session, one received written feedback reports from all colleagues and bosses, assessing people in 5 criteria, including teamwork, communication, and of course, the earnings, their bottom line. They described the culture in which, quote, executives simply refused to tell the truth about weak members of their team with whom they were friendly, knowing that all the other executives in the room were doing the exact same thing. Rather than reflecting a true meritocracy, the performance review community became a perversion of it. Sometimes managers would purposely sabotage one candidate to ensure room at a high level for one of their favorites. End quote. I'm sure that sounds familiar for some of you. So in such an environment where bonuses could be up to 6 figures, the bonus, depending on how high up the food chain you were, would you risk rocking the boat for anything so inconvenient as the truth? The role of individual authority figures who are able to go out against regulatory standards to manipulate, cajole, and threaten people to obey are often the linchpins of such organizations. So much responsibility rests on their soldiers. So much responsibility rests on their shoulders. The decision to say yes to some things and no to others, that they become synonymous with their organizations and schemes. This is essentially what happened at Enron. The leadership fostered a culture of permissiveness in which appearances were more important than reality. And for as long as the tide was out, the sandcastle was impressive. But at the end of the day, it was just that, a sandcastle. Or, a gold-plated wooden hotel. You only need, a subtitle for this section, you only need a small majority or a powerful minority. In our little story, our emperor in his new suit is relatively low stakes. He's rich and powerful. In fact, we almost applaud the swindlers who were able to take advantage of him and get away with it. However, in white-collar crime, this is rarely the case. The fallout from scandals like Enron in 2001, SVB, FTX more recently, and of course the crash in 2008 with its many moving parts, revealed the importance of a fully functional system with the appropriate checks and balances to keep things from going awry. When analysing seismic events such as the fall of Enron, FTX, or SVB, it's always important to remember that we're talking about systems. In an empire, the emperor is essentially the system, which is why he can afford to look stupid. However, in a democracy, in the capitalistic system in which we live, there are many cogs coming together to make the machine. If we allow ourselves to focus on the individuals, we lose the woods for the trees, because the behavior of individuals can be misleading. Yes, Andy Faustar created an accounting culture in which 600 people colluded to get paid. Yes, Ken Lay created an organization in which bullies and lies thrived and criminal activity was rife. But even when we consider these sizable influences, the wider picture is that it all took place in a wider context, which is the way that stock markets and Wall Street and regulations work, and all the loopholes that exist for you to be able to lie for decades. While studying chemistry during the IB, I remember learning something which still blows my mind. Chemistry teachers say that in a kettle of water, let's say at 95 degrees, not all the molecules are the same temperature. Some are still cold. They have no kinetic energy at all, while the others are basically ready to become vapor. It's like a club. Some people are dancing, some people are just hugging the wall. That's what's happening in the water, and as we know, temperature is the average of what's going on in that kettle. Just as we know whether the club is happening or whatever word the youths are saying now, based on the majority of people who are dancing, not that everyone is dancing. So in a system, such as a kettle of boiling water or a club, you need a majority to overwhelm the rest. This is what happens with conformity, especially in a business like Enron. You just need the majority of people to be willing to collude, willing to bully their subordinates, make sure they commit the crimes. You need the accounting team to stretch the truth, be creative with the facts. In a political system, it's the same kind of thing. I might do an addendum on this and talk about the role of the media and how they played into this, and the analysts, and how they really kept the lies going because they just didn't look into things. In a political system, it's the same kind of thing. You need the majority to be able to vote, and that's who wins. So to get things done, you need a majority of people to agree with you in order to be able to do most things, or you need to be the powerful minority. That's the person who's paying for the thing to happen. If I say to you, come to my house, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, you have no choice, right? Like the emperor, he's a powerful minority. The person paying for all the things, or the person willing to hurt the most people, you have the power to hurt people until they do what you want. It's also why I'm an advocate for effective regulation, because sometimes you can't trust people to set their own limits. You can't trust that individual who has power, who's able to say what should be done, to not do bad things that work in their favor, right? If they can find loopholes to game the system, they will, because greed is rewarded in capitalism. The next section is called Who Watches the Watchers. Unfortunately, when we talk about regulations, we're still talking about human involvement. Like I said, people who can play the system to get what they want, which is where things can go badly wrong. One of my favorite sayings in Latin, I know like 5, so, it's not difficult to pick one, lies at the heart of the matter. Quies custodiet, don't judge my accent, quies custodiet ipso custodis, commonly translated as who watches the watchers or who can watch the watchmen. In a system built on trust, which capitalism essentially is, people have to behave in a trustworthy fashion because there's no police coming and looking at everybody and what they're doing, right? It's one of the reasons why we have external auditors looking at people's books to make sure they pass muster. Sadly, Arthur Andersen, once a well-regarded accounting firm and the watchers in our little tragedy, lost its way and began to encourage conformity to the Enron way, which is not what you want when you're playing with people's money. The duplicity was everywhere. And it's not what we expect from the people put in charge to keep people sticking to the rules. At Enron, the chief accounting officer, Rick Cowsey, failed to rein in some of the more criminal activities at Enron, leading to the downfall of the whole organization. Describing the accounting team run by Fastow, the real villain of the piece, the CFO, and Cowsey, the chief accounting officer, McLean and Elkind point to the accounting team's conviction that what they were doing was not breaking the rules, but stretching them. The question is that you have to ask, why do you need to stretch the rules at all? Anyway, quote, "To this day, a few of the in-house accountants believe that they did not do anything wrong. They knew that they stretched and twisted the rules to Enron's advantage, but they saw their actions as creative rather than misleading. However, this is not strictly true. Here is how an employee described the process by which they arrived at their wonderful shenanigans. Quote," I'm going to try and do an American accent, forgive me. "So you have a dog, but you need to create a duck on the financial systems. Fortunately, there's specific accounting rules for what constitutes a duck. Yellow feet, white covering, orange beak. So you take the dog and you paint his feet yellow and his fur white and you paste on an orange beak on his face. And then you say to the accountants, this is a duck. Don't you agree this is a duck? And the accountants say, yes, according to the rules, this is a duck. Everybody knows it's not a duck, but that doesn't matter because you met the rules for calling it a duck. And there was the ultimate problem. We stopped being the employee. I'm back. But the quote continues. With Enron's financial team working feverishly to exploit the rules, there was no one willing to say that the duck was still a dog because they could come up with plausible rationales for a given structure, which was technically valid. They believed they were on the right side of the law. In fact, they were proud of what they were doing because they thought every other company was doing it, except that they were doing it better and smarter because they were Enron, where everything was done better and smarter. End quote. It's regrettable but deserved that an organization like Arthur Andersen, which was for a long time, nearly 100 years, considered the most upright accounting firm, and they should end up on the trash due to their willingness to collude, condone, and help Enron cover up their crimes. To quote Sean Paul, them hang out with too much dogs and catch fleas. Oops. Those of us from strict homes know. Tell me who your friends are, and I'll tell you who you are. Or even worse, birds of a feather flock together. Whoever taught our parents English just so they could torture us was wicked. But in this case, the parents were not wrong. Oh, I was hacked. I never said that. Listen to this description of how Arthur Andersen started and compare it to where they ended up. Quote, this is also from the smartest guys in the room. Arthur Andersen started the first training school for accountants, recruiting young men out of college. So Arthur Andersen was a person, Norwegian, I think. Arthur Andersen started the first training school for accountants, recruiting young men out of college so he could indoctrinate them in the Andersen way. They all had to dress the same, use the same methods, offer the same level of service, and uphold the same high standards. Competitors seized at what they saw as Andersen's arrogance and labeled its staff as androids. The founder could not have cared less. Andersen's successor, Leonard Spacek, ran the firm from 1947 to 1963 and was every bit as self-righteous, often publicly scolding his profession for, as he put it in a 1957 speech, failing to square its so-called principles with this professional responsibility to the public. He regularly berated the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, for not doing enough of a good job of rooting out accounting fraud, claiming that the SEC was at best a brake on the rate of retrogression in the quality of accounting, and continued his crusade for high standards even after he retired from the firm. The Financial Accounting Standard Boards, which was formed in 1973, came about largely because of Spacek's insistent lobbying. End quote. So it was from these lofty heights that Arthur Andersen fell because of greed. And if there's one thing we have learned, one thing that I've learned from white collar crime, is that there's usually a point that you can stop. This is one of those trends that I noticed. There are usually points at which one can rectify what's been broken, but every time people act as though they are powerful oracles able to see into the future. They are wrong, and without fail, even empires fall because they overstretch themselves and forget that the environment in which they are currently operating is not the same one in which they started. People become wise to their bullshit, and those people who were previously happy to be silent or complicit develop a conscience, and the boat starts rocking. I'm sure that Louis XVI didn't expect to find his head on a block awaiting the fall of the guillotine, but ironically, one of life's constants is change. Whether you're running France as an absolute monarch or the world's leading energy company, you have to be prepared for turbulence. In closing, as I said, when I read about white-collar crime, I'm always trying to learn something from what happened. Obviously, I'm trying to learn how to do business, not how to do crimes. I'm not trying to learn how to do crimes. Don't get me confused. I'm not smart enough to do crimes, but there are definite lessons to be learned. And from Enron, some of the lessons are: number one, just because you missed your turning, it doesn't mean you can't find your way back. With the emperor, he basically said, in for a penny, in for a pound. Number one, that's a silly saying. That is dumbassery, or as the proper term goes, sunk cost fallacy. A pound is 99 other pennies. You've spent one or you've lost one. Lose the one penny and run with your 99 other pennies. You're going to just refuse to wear those clothes, say there's nothing there, I'm not doing it, I'm going to wear my regular clothes, have these charlatans arrested, and moved on with his life. It's okay to look stupid and come out and say, you know what, we missed our turning, this is not the way, especially when the alternative is jail. Number two, the second lesson is don't do crimes. Kenneth Lay died before he could even go to prison, but he lost his reputation and will forever be remembered as a bit of a shit. Don't do that to yourself. Number three, integrity is boring, and boring is good. The old Arthur Andersen was working fine, but they wanted to smoke at the back of the shed with the cool kids, and look what happened. Say no to crime, kids. Boring is good. That's all from me. As I said, I might do an addendum on this episode with the aftermath, how it relates to FTX, some interesting points about the media, the analysts, and also how people like Ken Lay try to rebrand themselves as victims when they're in the wrong. I have 5 points on that, and it actually just follows such an interesting pattern. I found it fascinating. For now, though, thank you for listening. Join me next week when I will finally be talking about Idris Elba as a wish-granting genie. Thank you.